Where are we going? North.
Welcome to Deges and Dragons.
Therapeutic benefit in role-playing games.
Welcome to Deges and Dragons.
Oh yeah, baby. Your presence requested in exchange for treasures.
Red River.
Are we talking one treasure each?
Count that.
Welcome to Deges and Dragons. Today we are playing Early Dark, and instead of me running it today, the creator himself, Calvin Johns, is here to run it for us. So take it away, Calvin.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, we're going to be playing Early Dark today, and I think the best sort of overview, I'll talk about the game a little bit, we'll talk about the system just a little bit, and then we'll jump into what would have been character creation. I made some pre-gens for our particular adventure today, so we'll kind of walk through one of those character sheets. Maybe whichever one of the plucky players wants to have all of the mins and maxes of their character explained to them can volunteer for that, and we'll walk through one of those and show how those things work. So Early Dark was our first game with Anthropos Games. It was actually, I think, just like the third or fourth game ever on Kickstarter way back in 2009 or 2010. You had to go through like an interview process and stuff to be on the website. It was a new thing. And yeah, so then it came out in 2012, which again, back then, 3-year turnaround was great for a book like this. And it is a low fantasy, sort of dark fantasy role-playing game that was specifically developed to kind of pull in some different progressive conceits and to really demonstrate just the multiplicity of human cultures, particularly then power structures and ways of being and sort of ways of organizing society that would be different from what you see in those high fantasy, very like Renaissance focused and definitely Eurocentric role-playing games. But then also things that were sort of demonstrated different ways of being than our even contemporary capitalist societies in the global north too. So we really had a lot of those sort of anthropological conceits kind of put in the game. Being fans of Tolkien, being fans of like the universe of Conan and things like that, but really just seeing some kind of issues of, going back to the source material non-critically, just reinforces a lot of the hierarchies and a lot of the injustices in the world. So to combat that, we made a very unjust game. It's loaded, it's a dark fantasy game, right? So it's loaded with systems and ways that people are sort of organized. And your characters and your heroes then aren't necessarily fighting against those, but definitely can. And so Early Dark takes inspiration from a lot of different traditions and world, like sort of literary cultures, looking at those older epics from places like South Asia, places in Europe, places even in the New World too. And having sort of, taking this sort of like rich mythic history and kind of trying to make it real in a way and kind of inviting players to explore and play in worlds, maybe from their favorite movies or maybe from a history assignment they read in a class in school or something, and really give them a space to sort of live out these epic fantasies in this sort of, this dark fantasy, crunchy, person-focused setting or person. It's a very like individual person and culture-focused game. So I think that works as an overview. Each of the major civilizations in the game is then, it started out as kind of like a mashup of like a real world culture or historical tradition, but never really went so far as to try to like represent those cultures. I think it was more taking sort of aesthetic features that are sort of valorized or championed in Western and global fantasy things like, let's say, the Vikings, right? And I think that's maybe even more topical now, right? We have all these shows about Vikings. There's like 9 of them on TV right now. And then combining that, or like taking also inspiration from other cultures that don't always get sort of glamorized in things like fantasy, right? That also have great traditions, like First Nations people in Canada, Inuit peoples up in Canada, or Native American cultures. And so we kind of put those together in a way, or just trying to draw things to show just a unique or novel way of arranging a civilization or arranging a culture. One of the civilizations is then we just took sort of like the enemies of Rome, right? We have a lot of this sort of glamorizing of Rome. Well, let's take like the Celts that people really like, and what about the Persians, right? These enemies of the sort of Hellenistic world. Let's put those together. We've got our horse archers, right? This idea of the steed and the mounted archer, which was such a huge thing in Persia. And then we have things about the Celts and like the obsession with cattle and horses, which if you've ever read any kind of Celtic literature, every single thing about it is a cattle raid, right? No one goes and fights monsters. They steal cows. That's like what makes you a badass in Celtic culture, right? And so kind of like putting that together in a way, to give a space where people could really just draw from and pull in those different sort of world epics together. And so, it's never been trying to like sort of represent other cultures for sure. We did draw a lot from other cultures just, again, to try to grab everything we could so that if you see a really great movie, like there's a way you can fit it in here. Much like what fantasy does, that sort of pastiche that like Dungeons and Dragons has, where, if you watch a cool movie or have a good idea, there's probably a way you can pull it into your D&D game. We tried to do the same with Early Dark. Like maybe, but instead of you like watching a cool movie, maybe you like had a history assignment, or you learned something about like potlatch communities and like, wait, is this how people like, generate culture and perform culture through eating and destroying food? That's awesome. Like, I want to put that in a game, right? Like Early Dark's the kind of game to bring in those kinds of ideas you might have. So I think that works as sort of a basic overview. If anyone has any questions maybe, or any things maybe that you've read in the game that you think I should highlight, you can bring those up now, and then if not, I'll jump into the system.
Let's jump in.
Yeah.
Jump away.
So the way Early Dark is set up, your characters have aptitudes. And so instead of sort of, what are they, like attributes, or instead of traits, or instead of characteristics, you have aptitudes. And this is, again, one of those, Early Dark is a funny game. It looks a lot like a sort of standard dark fantasy game, but every piece of it just forces you to kind of turn your head a little bit askew. And so these aptitudes, it looks like a list of stats, but these are not necessarily what your character is good at. It is what your character is likely to do, right? So they have higher numbers because that's what you do. Your character that has a high fight, you fight a lot, and you're going to get successes when you do. It doesn't mean you have to be a martial artist. It doesn't mean you have to look like a brawler or a boxer. Your character is just scrappy, right? That fight aptitude represents scrappiness more so than it represents any kind of skill you might have with a sword, right? Your skills and things come from your arts. Later on in the system, these aptitudes, cunning, fight, relate, guile, thrive, touch, labor, and move. These are aptitudes that fit humans, it fits animals. You can put a Venus flytrap on there too, right? We really try to make it just sort of like ways that, the human animal can relate to its environment. And so those 8 aptitudes are going to be sort of your numerical stats for the game. Every move, every action, every turn you take in the game of Early Dark goes from like role play to rolling dice. So kind of like the new story games, you can describe and do whatever you want. And based on your description of your character's intent and your approach or your actions, we will decide on 2 of those aptitudes. And adding those 2 aptitudes together becomes your target number for the pool dice roll. And so there's things you can do where your target number becomes 2. And you have to roll a bunch of dice and add them up to be less than 2. The way the pool system works in Early Dark, we have certain domains. You have a mundane domain, and you've got 2 sort of domains of magic, arcane and loom. Those dice numbers are fixed. Most of our characters today are going to be rolling 9 mundane dice. So they start with a big pool of 9 dice, and it's those aptitudes that are going to set your target. And you're going to actually arrange your dice then into groups, and the more groups you can fit under that target number, the more actions you get to take on your turn. So we really say when you roll, you're kind of rolling for opportunity. You're not necessarily rolling to hit someone. You describe your action, and we'll get into examples and stuff like that. If you were, picking up a table and throwing it at all the enemies on the other side of the bar, that could be a fight labor, right? This idea of fight, you're kind of like grabbing and, coming up with something scrappy to unleash harm. And then labor is this idea of moving or pushing the environment around you. So pretty standard fight labor roll. If you notice a chandelier and throw your dagger to hit the rope against the wall and drop that chandelier on your enemies, that could be a cunning labor, right? You're still sort of using your environment, you're still moving matter, but now it's like you've role played that as a cunning idea, right? Those 2 things, just as easy. You'll get to learn your character, and if you have a high cunning and a low fight, it's probably better to chop chandeliers down than it is to throw tables, right? But the effect could be the same in a certain way. And so really it's sort of freeform, kind of like the more story games. World of Darkness system, or like the storyteller system, is similar in that you describe what you want and you fix it to 2 particular stats or aptitudes here. So all the game, really that's kind of just what you have to learn to get into it. Rolling dice and then adding them up to make separate groups instead of a sort of a static target number for each die. If your target is 6 for like a fight and a labor, you add your fight to your labor, you get 6. You're rolling 9 dice against that. You want low numbers, right? It's a golf game. So if you can get like 1, 1, 1, 3, 0, wow, you've just fit 5 dice under that number 6, right? And you can put that all together. 3, 1, 1, 1, and 0 is a great way to get 5. That's a huge tack where you can do some damage with. by fitting those low numbers under your target number of 6. If you just roll all 6s, you can just have a bunch of 1s, and those are 5 actions you can take, but they're each going to be 1 die instead of one big group of 5. And so Early Dark works with kind of like a hidden system. There's a little bit of player skill involved here. It means I'm not that good at it, to be quite honest. My younger brother is much better, but when you roll your dice then, you will actually arrange those into groups hidden from other players. Your opponent will do the same, and then you reveal, and groups of the same size cancel out. And all remaining tacks, we call them tacks. Every little group is a tack, which is short for attack and stack. So you can't go wrong. It's hard to forget. And so you'll arrange these tacks. They cancel out. You might hit me with one of those big stacks of 5 and a big stack of 4, but I might hit you with all 4 of my little stacks of 1. Right? So there's that kind of player. If you can suss out your enemy, if you know that all they want to do is make a bunch of little 2 tacks, you can sort of predict their strategy and know how to respond and how to get, what you want out of that fight. So yeah, it's rolling a pool of dice against this target number, arranging them into groups is going to be the core mechanic of the game. You have different rules for what you can do with stacks of different sizes. Any stack of 1 size is called an advantage. There's a list of 5 things you can do with that. Those are things like disarming your opponent, disrupting their footing, giving them a small penalty, doing a simple action, things like that, right? So there are kind of these small advantages that can be very useful in play, but only take on 1 tack. 2 tacks are considered hits. This is something then that can unleash abilities your character has learned from their arts. So every different art will have different things you can do with one of these small tacks of 2. And those are then your more technical abilities that you learn. Any tack of 3 or higher can then be used as an attack, and those are strikes. And so as you're arranging your dice, you might want a bunch of 2s. If you have a particular talent that's all about giving massive penalties to your opponent, that might be your job in combat. You're going to take some hits here, but you're going to set up all these massive penalties, and then on the next turn, someone else is going to jump in and do that damage. It's all about sort of what you need or what you want to do for your player in the turn, right? So we call the 1 and 2 tacks are secondary. They're sort of the smaller things that you do with sizes of 1 and 2, and then 3 or higher are going to be your attacks. And every art might have some special things you can do with those as well. So that's sort of the basic mechanic. We have different things called checks and saves and bouts, and it's really just different ways of defining, when you're going to be rolling, how you're rolling against your opponent, and things like that. The range system in Early Dark is a dynamic range system. You don't have a fixed range. You don't have a grid. You don't say this is how far away I am from things. If your character wins initiative, you set the range that opponents have to be in if they want to attack you. And so the range then is kind of dynamic. If you were playing with your minis on the table, then you can move your minis on every turn, right? You'll just be moving them like, oh, I'm at long range from the beast, so we're over here now, right? And you can actually move folks around, which I like better because it gets to use your whole terrain that you build. But you actually can set, if you win initiative, you say, I want to be in melee range with my enemies. If that archer wants to attack me, he can't attack me from long range. I want initiative. He has to enter melee range if he wants to attack me. Right? If you're a grappler, you say, I'm setting grappler range, I want initiative. If anybody here wants to fight me, they have to do it on my terms in grapple range. And so it's, again, that little bit of a skew thing where you have to kind of think about your range sets where other people have to be to attack you. The problem is if you lose initiative, you then have to attack them in the range that your opponent has decided, right? And so that range system's then, kind of another way that makes combat, I like it because then you're literally like moving. It's like you get to play more like with your G.I. Joe guys. You're like moving the minis around the table versus getting out rulers and kind of wargaming it. And then the only thing I'll bring up here then to kind of wrap up the system part, your health and your wounds. So every character will roll up when you go on guard. You're going to roll a bunch of dice and sort of get your stamina, your ad hoc or your temporary sort of stamina or guard. This number. And it's kind of like the newer conversations of hit points, right? Where hit points used to just be sort of like your meat matter. And now people are like, no, hit points represent your energy and your ability to protect yourself. That's exactly how it's been in Early Dark, right? Your guard represents how well you are and how positioned you are to protect yourself. With any of those tacks of damage, people can be wearing down your fatigue, wearing down your guard. Eventually you'll get to a bottom limit. Every character will have a ground, and that's as low as they can go. It could be 6, it could be 8. And when they get you low enough, the people with the striking abilities are going to come in and strike, and they're going to be rolling dice to try to overcome that ground to actually deal wounds to you. So you have this sort of like massive hit points, and once you get down to a certain level, people then are going to come in and try to deal wounds. If they can do multiple multiples of your ground. They can do multiple wounds in a turn. And so again, it has that little two play back and forth. And some characters are going to be really good at fatiguing enemies. Some characters are going to be good at striking enemies. Some characters are going to be good at ignoring their armor or giving them penalties to kind of deplete their pool. If you come in for a strike and miss, you do fatigue to yourself, because you kind of like, you leave yourself open. If you go to stab the guy and miss, he's like, ha ha, and you can just, get you. So there's again a little bit of that choice. That gets to that sort of poker face of how you're moving your attacks around behind your hand. But yeah, I think those are the big things. The aptitudes and the way the dice pool works, those kind of dynamic ranges in early dark, and then that kind of two-prong health system where you wear down guard and then deal wounds. That's sort of the bulk of the mechanics of the game. There's a whole thing about character creation, character generation, and your alignments and experience points that I think we'll get into next. But when it comes to the system, and just for folks to be able to follow along at home, that's going to be enough for you to get to know, right? Every action has 2 aptitudes added together, becomes a target for your roll. Arrange them into groups. Each group's a different action. So any questions about that, or anything that, maybe ideas that popped up or something you want to chat about before I jump into, and then we can go into the characters and we'll pick someone to sort of walk through their sheet.
This might be something that we just talk about later, but I'm looking at, so like the guard. So I see I have a ground of 8, and then I have armor 7, and like the guard block is blank. So it's just armor that applies to like my guard there that would need to be whittled down.
Your guard, so on the character sheet, then it's a big empty block. Every time you enter an encounter, you're going to roll a guard, and it'll start at something like 35 or 40. Okay. And so that's going to be that guard. If someone tries to attack you right from the get-go, if you roll up, maybe you roll a bad guard. You're going to be rolling 4d10 and adding it to your thrive bonus. So you'll see your thrive might be like a 17 plus or 16 plus. So you're going to roll like 4d10 plus 16 or 17. That sets your sort of your guard or your stamina or your hit points for this, that encounter. And so if you start at 40, you've got your 40 guard there, and you've got an armor of 7. Someone would have to roll a strike. They'd have to roll 47 or higher to deal a wound. So it would be really dumb for them to try that, because that'd be really hard. So they're going to try to take that 40, and they're going to slowly just like winnow you down, tack after tack, doing fatigue damage, till you get all the way down. Maybe you get down to 15. And some guy's got a really big strike, and he's like, you've got a 15 guard left, you've got 7 armor, so that's going to be 22. I can get 22 if I'm rolling a good strike. And they try to do your wound right then. Maybe they say, I don't want to do 1 wound, I want to try to do 2. So they winnow you all the way down to your ground, which is 8. That's as low as your guard can possibly get, is 8. No matter what, it's going to be 8, right? So now 8 plus your 7 is 15. So now if they can roll 15, they do a wound to you. If they can roll 30, they can do 2 wounds to you. And so it becomes that, that guard box is where you're going to actually roll up and write down your hit points, and do all your little checks and your races, and you'll keep track of your hit points in that box.
Okay.
And then your aura is another form of armor that's just sort of less physical. So some folks would have an armor of 7. I think most folks here have like an armor of just 2. Adhana has an armoring ability, so she can actually wear hard armor, which means you get high armor rating with low weight. Everybody else has like a 2-to-1 ratio, so they can only afford to wear like light armor, or it gets too encumbering.
So weak.
So weak. And we made that too. That's kind of just one of those. They're conceits of realism in certain ways in early dark, where armoring, to make armor, to put armor on. That's a skill in and of itself, right? To be able to know like what to do with it. If I saw pseudo armor on the ground, I wouldn't know how to put it on. I wouldn't know what piece comes first, or how much padding I need under my elbows, or which sort of things like that. So when you get a suit of armor, and I rolled for you, since it was character creation, you'll see that your armor is actually, like you said, it's a 7, and you got to roll a thing to lower the weight of that armor. So the armor only weighs 4 for you, but it gives you a protection of 7. And for everyone else, when their armor weighs 4, it only gives them a protection of 2. They're actually they're at a 2-to-1 ratio. So yeah, that's a good thing to bring up. Yeah, that hit point thing. There's other numbers that can sort of add on to your guard when it comes to someone trying to roll a strike against you.
Very cool.
Well, I think we should pick a character then. Is there one that we maybe haven't talked about, or one of the characters we think that looks a little more maybe diverse than the other ones, that might sort of hit a couple different things? I know we have our Dwada, we have our druid here, who's got an arrangement of things. I know we have our other Alagoth that has some good abilities there too. We have our Magicker. I'm cool with walking through any of them. Or all of them, whatever you want to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll just defer to you. Let's start with Wakiota.
Okay.
And check all of that out.
Yeah, so you all can see it on your screens, right? So I'll walk through it here. So it will be, if it's the same format you use for other folks, it'll be right over, look over here, and you'll see it right here. Wakiota's character sheet is now right here. And we'll let you all introduce your characters then, I think, officially when the adventure starts, right? So let's leave this first page here then. We'll have it on the first page. You can see the first page now. We'll have the character's epithets, which you'll get to decide. This is sort of the name or the renown that the character gained during the last sort of Great War, which ended 6 years ago in the setting of the game. And so every one of these characters, the reason why they're like just a hint above average, or the reason why that people are even starting to write stories about them are that something happened in this war that sort of gave them an epithet. So the way the experience works in Early Dark, you are going on quests or adventures to unlock big groups of bonuses. And then you are role-playing and doing, like playing out the mundane lives of these gritty adventurers to gain experience points to then purchase these big bonuses that you've put together. And so each one of these packages comes along with an epithet. It's a name that your hero gets, right? And we can think of, super basic ones. I mean, like Bruce Springsteen's the boss, right? You can have like sort of simple, easy ones. But then go back in history, I mean, someone like a character like Beowulf, I mean, Beowulf is a name that means bear. Like, isn't your name an epithet already? Sort of a thing. And so that's how we know Beowulf. Like, his name is Ted. We just know him as Beowulf because that was the big epithet that he got. And you can go back and think of like Gandalf, right? Like, was it Keeper of the Flame of Arnor? And, all these things. Or Aragorn, right? The heir of Isildur. Like, he's got different names, different titles. Other cultures have, again, it becomes indistinguishable, like Beowulf, from any other kind of name, right? All names are epithets in a way. And so you can, I think, when you introduce your character, everyone's kind of been soaking in these characters now for maybe an hour or so. So I'll let you all do that, right? You'll have your epithet that kind of comes along with what your character did in that war to kind of make a name for themselves. The characters have alignments. These are the ways that you gain experience points, that you slowly sort of collect your experience points to be able to purchase these packages or these levels that you unlock. And these are then built into the culture of the game. Very few of our players here are going to be sort of adventuring nomad murder hobos. Everyone is invested in a culture. Everyone gets their food from somewhere. Everyone has a family somewhere. And so when we go on quests or adventures, you can end up divesting and sort of becoming a murder hobo, but nobody starts that way. There's always a story behind a murder hobo. And so we're taking that earlier step. And so they have alignments. These are the ways your character makes moral choices or your character makes meaningful choices to gain experience points by role-playing those alignments. This first page over here also has your inventory. Again, a little head askew here. Early Dark, we just keep track of 2 inventory lists so that you have a certain amount of capacity you can carry on you, like that you can wear, that you have immediate access to. Think of it as like your vest or your belt. If you want to switch weapons in combat, if you want to have armor, if you want to have potions on the ready, you have to have them on your vest or on your belt. Then if you have a backpack with a bunch of stuff, you can carry a bunch more. So it's kind of like we just keep track of how much you can keep on you immediately accessible and how much you could actually carry if you were marching, or you want to have your 10 feet of rope and your 10-foot pole and your 5 lanterns and stuff like that. You'll keep track of that just in the column next to it, so that when things come to combat, we know what's available to your character. You can't dig through a backpack and pull out something if it's not sort of at the ready in the encounter. And so that's the first page. We will let the folks introduce themselves, and they can go through their alignments and they can talk about their great commitments and their epithet in just a moment. So now we're going to page 2 of this character. You'll see the dice up top then. These are the 3 domains of the game. The mundane domain. All of our heroes, all of our fighters, all of our scholars, all of our tricksters, all of our rogues, everyone that is kind of not using magic is in that mundane domain. So this character here has 8 mundane dice. Every time they do something, they're going to be rolling in the mundane domain. They're going to be rolling 8 dice. Early Dark kind of cuts against sort of like scholars, like the smart folks having one set of dice and like the fast folks having another, the strong folks having another. All of that fits under the mundane category. So all of our right cast Neferata are all going to be high 9s on that. This Duata here has an 8. Arcane is that magic that plays with nature and plays on the fray or like the underside of nature. This is then, magic as we know it. The way that the world sort of lore works in Early Dark, the world is a tapestry. We all live on the pretty top side, but there is a very messy bottom side. And so arcane magic sort of plays with that chaos that comes from the other side of the tapestry. Loom then is you're more sort of in line with nature. So this is a magic that sometimes may or may not even look like magic. You could think of characters like Gandalf, right? Where like is just being kind of wise magic? Sort of is. And so your Loom dice, even like in a Jedi sense too, if you wanted, right? This idea of like sort of being in touch and sort of following the natural lines, you will then use your Loom dice. And so our Druid here is going to be heavy in Loom. The reason why they have more mundane dice than they do Loom is because the more you learn, every time you learn an epithet about your surroundings, you gain more Loom dice. So if our Druid, who will be spending some of their time then, learning the name of the region they're in, learning the name of the village, learning the name of the monster that you might be fighting, gives you extra dice every time you roll against it. If you can learn 3 names, if the monster is so cool, it has 3 separate names, learn all 3 of them, you've got plus 3 dice to add to his Loom dice when he's rolling against that particular monster. So so then why not keep more dice in mundane when it comes to other stuff? Because you can bump those Loom ones later. So those are the 3 domains of the game. If this particular Druid was getting attacked by a Magicker that was trying to use some kind of, mind or blood magic or cause a disease or something, having those arcane dice that low, that leaves you sort of an opening there. So be it, right? So it goes. Underneath that, we will see the aptitudes. You can see that for this Duata here, 4 cunning, 3 fight. We got a 5 in touch. So, this is a weaver. This is someone that's very in touch with the world. Touch is going to be sort of your sensitivity, like with fingertips. Also sort of like your manual dexterity, if it came to tying knots or something. Also your senses, perception checks, things like that, we'll be using touch. Going across there, we've got room for augments and mods. These are just ways that as you unlock higher levels, it costs a lot to upgrade your aptitudes directly. You probably won't do that very often in the game. These aptitudes you have, you're stuck with them, right? This is kind of like your character has strengths, your character has weaknesses. If Wakioda here tried to roll in a relate move footing, you're gonna get hit, right? That would give you a target number of 3. What would be relate move? Oh, like riding. If you try to ride an animal, you're like the bumbling one. You're the person like is always getting on the horse backwards and stuff like that, right? And so, that's like a footing. That's just a weakness. If you're probably not going to get over that weakness. But each of these aptitudes is then tied to a particular secondary trait. Those can be really important. And if you don't want to spend all of that experience and all of that sort of that weight in your levels to boost up your aptitudes, instead you can just put little augments on it. It won't change your aptitude, but it will change this secondary trait. So, for example, your character's labor. Right now in the character creation, for only 10 pages, I was able to give you a little augment there on your labor. So your labor now is, when it comes to setting your ground and setting your vest and your capacity for carrying, it's as though your labor is a 4. When you're rolling dice, your labor is still a 3, but that little augment, a magic ring, any artifact is going to fit in this modifier column here. And so that's how you're going to be boosting your abilities in these secondary traits. Any kind of magic ring will never change your aptitude. It will just change your rank, which can get you higher secondary characteristics. And we did that, for a couple reasons design-wise. We really want those aptitudes to kind of be fixed in a way like this is, because it's more about like your personality or demeanor, right? Like this is you. Like that is you right there. If you get stronger, it's going to change your traits. It's not necessarily going to change your aptitude. Moving down then to your arts and talents. This Druid here has Canvas. Investigating, getting information from folks. It's a great way to learn those epithets to give you more Loom dice, 1. It's also, you can retrieve 1 idea from a target. Early Dark has qualitative categories in a lot of the different arts. An idea being sort of the smallest chunk of information. I think we have a grifter in the party too, and they can steal up to 1 purse of wealth. So if you succeed in a grifting roll, you can't take a guy's wagon. It doesn't matter how well you do. If you're only this good at grifting, you can only steal something that's worth about a purse, right? So it's kind of like a qualitative sort of anchor or standard then for you to use. So when you're using Canvas, if you want to get something, you can't learn the motive of an enemy, but you can learn an idea from your target, right? It's kind of like just that qualitative amount. And then we have some Loom magic. So the character is going to try to be learning some epithets. We have provoke nature. This is the character then dealing with like the threads. I think there's some cool artwork in the book, right? Imagine these threads are, they're a combination of like the ley lines, right? The idea of having ley lines and having these conduits of energy in the world. But also they can even be like gossamer and like spider webs, right? They're everywhere. You can see it like in Donnie Darko, right? You can see like the past and the future kind of moving behind people. And so your character can use this ability to provoke nature. You can have, you can pull on a thread and have a tree fall down on someone. You can turn grass into blades. You can turn leaves into blades and have them just kind of like fall down like, shards of glass on the enemy. It's basically you sort of like playing with nature to indirectly attack an opponent. You have thread stock. This is a footing of touch and cunning. So whenever you're rolling your loom dice in a footing of touch and cunning, which would give you a target of 9, so you can get a lot of attacks, a lot of different actions on that in one turn. You're going to be arranging these just into hits. You just want little 2-tacks, as many groups of 2 as you can, and that will let you actually thread stalk people. So, or objects or anything. You can follow threads up to 100 yards away, and you can learn ideas and facts from those things too, right? So this duada here is a very good Sherlock Holmes type in a way. And then unravel is just straight combat. Touch fight, you can literally pull on people's threads and unravel them like a sweater. And because we bumped that up, we gave you a low ability in that. It works in grapple to melee range. So anyone that's anywhere near you, you can literally just start like pulling them apart. And notice here though, you don't do damage to them, you do shock. Shock, it's over there on the in the health and wounds. Shock is a number that has no effect on them in the present. It means the next time they roll guard, that's a penalty. So shock is like, it's what happens when you sleep outside. It's what happens when you get tired. It doesn't actually lower your stamina now because every time you get an encounter, you're gonna be re-rolling your guard. That stamina comes from 0 to 60 really fast, right? It's like on guard, roll it anew. The shock is actually where it starts giving penalties to that roll. So your character, you literally can unravel someone and it's like they're still standing like, ha, I'm fine. And you're like, sure you are, buddy. And then you walk away. The next time they try to roll guard, they don't have it and they can get struck really easily. So that's that character there. So you have then 4 arts. You have canvas that you can only use when you roll in that guile touch footing. You have your little loom magic ability here to learn epithets. You can use any footing that uses touch to learn epithets. And then you have your art of provoke nature, thread stalk, and unravel. And the footings then tell you what footing you have to be in, which 2 aptitudes together you have to be in to use those arts. You can use other ones. You can, role play about pulling on threads and stuff, doing other things, but they won't have those particular effects unless you're in that footing. And that might be good, if we look at like Adhana's character sheet too, she has, the big greatsword. She only gets the benefits to her hacking blade ability when she's rolling fight labor. She can still use that greatsword in fight move if she has to dodge out of the way when fighting someone, but she can't use those abilities that are attached to the greatsword and to her blade art unless she's in that one particular footing. Over in the top right then, this way, over in the top right, you'll have your equipped ranges. These are then, when it comes to setting your dynamic ranges, these are the ranges you have covered. So for this character, Wakiyoda has a sword. Again, Wakiyoda doesn't really worry too much about the ranges because they have the unravel ability they can use in grapple through melee just fine. So you just have sort of a basic sword. Anytime you are in reach range, if someone's trying to attack you in that, you're more than welcome to use your sword, right? You could throw it away and get yourself some more armor if you wanted, right? Because you really kind of have yourself covered in those ranges with your unravel ability. The 4 ranges then are grapple, reach, melee, and long. Grapple range is someone that you are holding onto right now, right? If you're holding onto the character, you are in grapple. If an animal puts you in grapple, you are being held or bit or clamped by that particular animal. Reach is something that you can reach. That's within arm's reach of you or the tip of your weapon, right? Anything that you could reach out, you're not touching it, but you could touch it. That's reach range. Melee is like you're in, a 10 or 15 foot area, you're in the same room, you're in, you take a step and then hit him with your axe, right? Like it's that one step, like you're on a tennis court, right? It's that one step hit. And then long range is if you're in the skirmish farther away from that. If you're 80 yards from your target, that's not long range. If you're 80 yards from your target, you're not even in a range. You would just be rolling indirect attacks from outside the combat. All of these ranges are in skirmish ranges. And we use that, again, it helps with mini play. It's also the idea that, if you're just an archer behind a row of infantrymen shooting arrows, You're outside the scope of the skirmish. You're just, it's just hailfire. So, and we explained the health and wounds. Just underneath that, then blood. This is a small buffer. This is armor for magic. If you're a magic user, we have one magic user with us. Every time you roll your dice, all the dice that don't hit get rolled against you. That's sort of like when you unleash the fray and chaos into the world, anything that doesn't become organized hurts you. And so the blood is then a buffer to stop you from taking too much damage, right? So most of you, it won't matter. Depending on the enemies, other mages that are using spells against you, that's kind of like your passive resistance to certain kinds of magic too. If you can't roll your arcane dice for whatever reason and you're making some kind of passive resistance to a mind control, to a poison, to someone trying to turn your arm into a lizard face or something, your blood would come into play. But mostly only the magicers use it to protect themselves from themselves. It's like putting on oven mitts when you use magic. Source is then only used, again, this is like the magic corner of the character sheet. For magicers, for people using arcane magic, because of what I just said, where you have to roll dice against yourself, you can actually get magical items that reduce the number of dice you roll against yourself. So again, this is more protection from your own chaos. We have this in here for a few reasons. One, it makes wizards just as obsessed with items as the barbarians and the fighters are. Even if you're great at magic, you can't just run around naked in nature using magic because it's so chaotic and crazy. You need these sort of these sources or these wards or these particular kinds of magic items that sort of help attract the chaos, right? Like crystals that absorb negative energy, sort of a thing. And so our magicker character, if we looked at Theravis' character sheet, has certain protections for their antagony, their violent magic, and certain protections for their blood magic. Every source will have a set amount of dice it can reduce from your backlash roll based on the type of magic. Source for a weaver or someone that uses loom dice, these are where you write down these epithets you've learned. And so you'll write down like, this forest used to be called like the blood leaves or something, right? And you start writing down these epithets and you'll collect those, and those are what give you more dice when you roll loom. So I think that's the character sheet here. Everyone now, as you're looking at your character, I think it'd be best if we go through and introduce our characters. And then, if you have some questions, introduce on that first page, give us your pitch of who you are or who you think you are, and then go down to that second page. And if you have any questions, I can answer those right then and there. And I'll let you go in whatever order you want, since you all know your who plays off of whom.
All right, I will of course go first as Adhana. Sorry, I'm picturing my character as like the very take charge. Like this is like I'm here for my entire culture. I am their arm in our quest, and I'm making sure that whatever their wants are met. And in doing so, I will try to take charge frequently and be disgusted when things aren't going the way that the Neferata would like. So I am part of the right caste, which is the lords, the philosophers, and the generals. So I come from the family Tusharun, and we are a long, noble family of generals. And so I am no different in that I was raised by them, and the way I was raised, my go-to, of course, is fight through things and use physical force to overcome things. And I am cunning too, but it's really a matter of finding the best ways to fight and labor. So there's that component. My epithet is simply the wall, as I am unflinching in both physical person and my world views. I think of in like the Romance of the Three Kingdoms with like Zhang Fei when they're like retreating and there's hundreds of people coming. So this is like part of like the last war where we get the title, right? So tons of people, like somebody important from the cast is retreating and there's a bridge. And I just stand there and mount my greatsword before the bridge, and I defend it, and nobody gets across. And that's kind of part of where I earned my powerful name. And I'm going along too with my arts, the the way I can have a presence that foes cannot use advantages against me. So I'm thinking about that too, where I'm surrounded. You would think that a bigger army would have the advantage, but no. My presence and stalwartness prevented them from overrunning me. So I think that kind of is the general gist, unless there's anything else I should go into.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And one of the things we like to do sometimes, if you take your like we did with our poor druid, if you take your 2 lowest aptitudes, they usually give you that's like the comic relief quirk, yours being Thrive and Touch. I didn't ask for people to come up with them, but that would be your bungle roll, right? That's like what you desperately hope you never have to roll in ever. And so think about, what it is about your character. It's a good way, right? I mean, think about like what it is about your character that would make them so bad at Thrive. Thrive is like plants would have like a super high Thrive, right? Like the flower that grows through the concrete, that's Thrive. Thrive is growth. And so to have a low, it's kind of, not necessarily will to live, but it has that will to it, right? So you maybe with a low Thrive, it could be, your family's always giving you direction. You haven't had to have that, right? And you have a lot of privilege. Your character has never needed to sort of develop that sense in themselves because they already have that, right? And then Touch being that idea of sensitivity and manual dexterity, right? Those would be just the lowest sort of aptitudes we see, and what your character doesn't worry about too much, right? Like you don't have to be sensitive to whether that person are their feelings hurt? I don't care, right? Again, your character doesn't have to worry about that. One of the things I think about early dark too, when you make a character and you choose your character's milieu, there are rigid, half of your aptitudes are determined by you walking through that milieu and deciding on your age group, deciding on your gender, deciding on the history of your character. And it's not to say, like a youth has a higher labor than an adult does. It's to say for a youth to become a hero or an adventurer, this is what the society values in that youth, right? Again, it's about aptitude, not about characteristics. So this fits perfectly. You get those low numbers because you are a right cast Neferata, right? Like your character kind of has to be a little bit out of touch because you live a life of privilege, right? So half of these are determined by the milieu. If you want a high something, pick that other something, right? Like if you want a high cunning, pick one of the milieus that gives you a high cunning. And then just to walk through your arts, do you have any questions about these arts? Again, armoring, tactics lets you roll outside of combat. You can roll in cunning move to try to set up an ambush. We talked about your presence earlier. Any questions about your hacking blade or your greatsword art?
So with with attacking all targets at a single range, and I see like weapon load, damage, dice, ignore guard of minions, awesome. So all of that, with that in terms of like tax, I would have to then set up more for every target I see, or is it like I get one because it's just my blade is that powerful?
Yeah. So and this is why I think this is why we're going to have this conversation, because this is Calvin's shorthand, right? I tried to squeeze this information on your character sheet. So what you get for having raw hacking blade is that your weapons load, which your greatsword up here has a load of 4, counts as your damage per die. So whenever you're doing fatigue damage, if you roll a 4 attack against somebody, that's 16 fatigue plus your low bonus. That would be you'd get 20. You can do 20 fatigue in one big hit, right? That sword becomes your damage instead of your fight stat setting your damage. So that's that basic. Your weapon load equals your damage per die in attack. Attack all targets at a single range is because we bumped up your hacking blade to a low art from raw to low. And so whenever you're fighting, you can, if you roll and you get a really big attack, you can say without anything, you can say, I want to attack every single person who I have range on, who I've set melee range with. Your threshing floor and your positioning take those little 2 attacks. Those are the hits. Those are your talents for that art. So if you have one big, large attack, and you have a little 2 tack on the side, you could say, I want to use my threshing floor. And so now all the other attacks I have here are going to ignore the guard of the minions. You'd actually have to sort of cash out that one hit or that talent to do that. Same with positioning. If at the end of your turn, maybe you don't get the big hit in, maybe they kind of cancel out and you've just got that one little 2 block left and you're like, I can do fatigue with it, or I can let any one of my allies take range on this guy and I can deal 1d10 fatigue and potentially get something higher. So the things with the dashes there, those are your talents.
Okay, and allowing an ally to take range, what exactly does that mean?
So that means then that if you have, like, let's say, maybe like Shezeran is in like grapple with the dire wolf, you can set it so nope, we're at, Sherzan wants long range, boop, they're set at long range, right? You can give an ally a chance to determine their range. It won't change their initiative order, but it'll change the range, and they'll say they can set range on the enemies. So it's kind of like, you do a little fatigue and you help out your teammate with that. It's kind of, like not really a block, but it's kind of like a block, right? It's a defensive, like tactical maneuver.
All right, very cool. I guess, the last thing, I didn't say how I appeared, is that I have the most elegant, pure white robes with the gold stitching, and I have 2 decorative horns that curve together above my head with a jewel that is connected in the center there. Part of my opulence as well as intimidating presence. And I have no shame, just very shameless about showing that off. And it just, so again, just into that right cast lordship position. She definitely stands out wherever she goes, unless I guess among other lords. But that's not the case here.
But you are the wall, so I mean, they would know you for that too, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you would be a very dark-skinned woman with who, like in this culture, that even like Egyptian culture, you would actually pull out all of your hair. So you have no hair, no eyebrows. You would just have eyelashes, and pretty much all the hair on your body would be groomed very elegantly by pulling it out, as the higher castes of the Neferata people do.
Oh, and I saw that the eyes are all shades. So, right? Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
So I'll have like emerald eyes that match an emerald jewel.
Nice.
All right,
Thank you.
me.
Okay,
Right,
I guess I can jump in because I know I need to at least probably go before Billy since I'm his patron.
I thought exactly.
Give you a little space. If I go, then Tony goes, gives you a little space to think about how you want to play this. Since there's a little bit of conversation there. So I am Wakioda. I'm the Duwada, as everyone now knows. I've been laid bare for all to see. So I am a druid of the Celeste Elm community. I'm Alagoth. And from the war, I gained the abilities of labor, low art, and low art unravel and low art provoke. So I view my role in the war that would have happened as one of kind of torment and shock. So although I, certainly a druid in almost all sense and still accepted by the community and still follow their rules and things, I think I'm also kind of a critical factor within the group, kind of an apocryphal heretic, sort of. Cool. So no one would question my faith or devotion, but I have some of these quirky other beliefs, specifically that the oncoming war has kind of initiated this end of history, which I view as good because it'll return to the loom of nature, right? So it will just, nature will overcome all, and that's the destiny of living creatures, is to return to the fecund nature, right? It'll just get eaten and a new nature will arise and all these sorts of things. So taking on this very apocalyptic sort of approach to coping with the history of the fact. And I view this being, kind of being, a lot of the other druids put up with me, and they certainly, they appreciate the study and thought that I've gone through, and I can make all of these technical arguments. But they're also kind of like, why don't you go adventure away from the White Forest? Why don't you keep those ideas maybe out in the main world? It's kind of setting me on this pilgrimage quest to kind of go out and talk to some other people, instead of staying in the White Forest where we're from and possibly, corrupting the youth or something like this. But then that will mean certain things for Shezeran. So whether or not you're an actual believer, or whether or not you kind of got foisted on this because all druids, get to look over somebody, and so they gave you, that will be up to you to decide how much you are on board with my actual beliefs. For appearances, tall, extremely gaunt and thin, wearing, I have minimal padded soft armor, but really wear the minimal amount of clothes possible. Completely bald. I do have a set, like a necklace with a set of like different monocles that I can pull up to my eyes at any given moment to investigate the weave. So just like, you know, so it's like kind of this whole, you know, necklace of just like all of these convex lenses that just hang around my neck, and each one has kind of a different tether that I can bring up to my eyes to investigate things. But I'm like freakishly tall and gaunt, so I spend a lot of time like just leaning over and peering into people and those sorts of things. So I imagine my epithet being the Doomsayer, right? So I've taken on this role, and it's a very dark and serious role. And if anyone had heard of me, they would have known me as this sort of like person who's always going on about, you know, the end of days, and you know, you think the war's over, but that was only the beginning, and it's just very negative sort of context. But I don't like that epithet as much because I think it's very hopeful. I think we're returning to nature, which is the destiny of life, right? So I have a very different reaction to my epithet than perhaps a lot of people would on the outside.
Awesome. And yeah, let's jump to that second side then. Any questions about any of your character's arts?
I don't think so. I mean, I guess from what I understand, using the loom, I could describe non-violent things I do with nature, and you would just decide which footing that then puts me on. It's only provoking if I do the guile. And, okay, good.
Yep.
That's what I figured. So then I think I'm pretty good because you were nice enough to walk through that already. Right. So I think I'm pretty good.
Cool. Tony?
Did you describe what your character looks like as well?
I did.
Oh, okay.
I did. I'm very tall and gaunt and bald.
You did. Sorry, I wasn't. I wasn't listening.
Like a very tall, depressing Monopoly man, right? So like a very aggressively pessimistic Monopoly man. So do not pass go. Do not collect $200. That is my personality.
The posture of a troll.
Yeah, exactly. Just like looming over you and kind of just like staring down your neck. You know, very uncomfortable.
Looming.
Yes.
Alrighty. Well, I am playing Thuvaris, who is also similar to Conrad culture-wise, a Nephtaris?
The Neferata.
Neferata, sorry, thank you. I, however, am the left class, so we tend to be viewed more as the bankers and the kind of like the shopkeeps of society. We're the only ones who are allowed to handle coin, which is kind of cool. So Conrad's not allowed to touch our money.
My money? That you're handling.
Sure. I am also a student of Varanara, which is where I am currently learning my magics. They also give me looks like meager room and board as well. My epitaph from the last war is where I increased my blood magic, and I gained trick blade talent as well as my cunning augments. So I'm thinking my role in the last war was also kind of where the left, because apparently magic is also illegal unless used specifically for state needs. So I'm thinking I probably came into a lot of my power around the war, and my class is just like, wait, she's actually really good at this, has an amazing aptitude. Let's get her into, get her into the schools where she can really learn to use this to better help our causes. So I believe that's probably where she's been the last. You said 6 years was when the war ended. So that's probably what she's been doing for the last 6 years, is really kind of honing her studies in the arcane arts and in blood magic.
Cool.
And as far as appearances, she is culture-wise. You said she'd be completely bald, no hair, similar to Conrad. So I keep with that motif. Also dark in complexion. She is going to be, unlike our druid companion, very short and very rotund individual. So she doesn't move around very quickly. That being said, she has an air of confidence about her. It's hard to place whether it's how she stands, her mannerisms, how she speaks, or how she speaks to other people. But as far as dress, probably a lot of dark, probably a lot of blacks, dark purples, deep reds to hide all of the blood when necessary. You would hate to look unfashionable at any point in time. She also has a sword. I'm gonna say the hilt of the sword has a little skull on it with little red jewels kind of coming down the eyes, going down the cheeks, almost look like little blood tears almost. And
any questions on that second half?
Yes. So my blood magic, the thrive aspect of it, where I deal shock. What's the range on that?
Yeah. So the way the mundane arts work is that you get an art and then you buy sort of talents in it. The way the arcane magic works is you have to buy a talent first, which kind of unlocks that family of magic, and then you buy arts inside it. So when you bought that sort of talent or that knack for blood magic, anytime you use thrive in any footing where you're rolling your arcane dice, you can do 2 shock with a hit. So that doesn't even really count as a spell. That's just anytime you use that thrive footing, your blood magic is sort of, so it works with your other abilities too, right? When you're rolling shapeshift,
example, if I shapeshift, I could shapeshift so grotesquely, just shocks my. Okay, perfect. Yeah. That was kind of how I was going with my shapeshifting in my head anyway. So that works out beautifully.
Yeah, and so the same then. So your antagony magic, you actually don't have any spells. You don't have like the arcane bolt, like the magic missile type thing. You don't have. Shockwave, you don't have that, but you just have that little knack where anytime you're rolling, you can even be in fight thrive, right? So you're kind of rolling your arcane dice, you can use a little hit to deal fatigue to somebody.
Okay, cool.
So it's it would look maybe like a little magic missile, maybe it would look like Jubilee and her sparkles, I don't know, whatever you want it to look like. You could spit blood, whatever you want. But whenever you're using, a fight footing, that's just like a little thing you can do with your tax on the side because you've engaged your magic. Even though you don't have spells in it, you have that knack sort of open.
Awesome. Cool. And yeah, I guess my terrible attributes are move and touch. So I'm just gonna go ahead and say that she's a terrible dancer as well.
Nice.
All the traditional Neferata dances.
Yeah, she terrible at them, and she has to do it too. It's
I'm like grossly offended, like when you can't do the dances properly.
As you should.
Yeah.
And our Packmaster.
Yeah. So, my name is Shezaran Anna Kurtek. Culturally, I'm an Alagoth, and I'm of the lower relative milieu, which I've intuited from my reading is sort of not, if not the poverty class, then at least more of the peasant lower class. Is that an accurate assumption, Calvin?
For the Alagoths, all of their cultures are like family or like clan based. So you would just be a relative. You can be very wealthy. You're just a relative that doesn't really have sort of political power. You're not like sort of like in the ear of the patriarch who runs the family. So you could just be, you could be somebody's daughter. You could be somebody's wife. You could be, a great adventurer or a very wealthy woman. You're just not politically sort of relevant to like the ear of the political leader of the family.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I'd imagine that she, was the daughter of a sort of middle class family that they had noticed had some aptitude in different areas, and I imagine Jonas and I can sort of negotiate this as we go. But I imagine that took an opportunity to come under the tutelage of Wakiyoda as opposed to being like forced into servitude or anything like that. It was more like maybe he and my parents came to some sort of deal in order to help her standing eventually. That's kind of how I imagine the relationship being brokered. And as far as that relationship goes, I imagine that Shezaran sort of fills in sort of the practical functional gaps that maybe Wakiota is missing. So, he has a low aptitude, and Shezaran is very empathetic and sympathetic, not just with animals, but with people, and has developed an aptitude also for working and dealing with exchange and money. And I imagine that she got that from traveling with her family. I picture her family being sort of peripatetic in that sense. Maybe the family or the most immediate extended family was a sort of a traveling band, and a lot of the skills that she picked up in her youth would be useful for someone like Wakiota, who's a little more intellectual, a little more heady, more wants to spend more of his time focused on the metaphysical. Wakiota is capable of taking on sort of the functional tasks of traveling around, brokering relationships, dealing with money, while also being interested in learning more about the world, as it were, or as it is, and looks up to Wakiota in that way. So it kind of works out in a nice, I think, symbiotic relationships. It does mention that she was a guide and a pack master as a profession. So again, comfortable handling money for the druids, accompanying them when they leave the White Forest. I see her being totally at ease, traveling outside the boundaries of established areas of people, and where kind of the pack master comes into play is the sort of slightly unearthly affinity that she has with animals. And I'll get into that in a second when I move into the arts and talents. So as far as strong attributes, my strongest attributes are relate and guile. So again, relating not both to people but to animals, and also being able to mediate. I see that as also, and I like this. I like the strength of guile also. I'm not sure that it's toward a manipulative end, but it definitely could be, and I'm interested to see that play out as we kind of move around. I see it as not manipulation for manipulation's sake, but more for being able to creatively mediate to come to positive conclusions for our party. Sort of those middle ones for me are cunning, thrive, and touch, which I think are fine. And then my bottom ones, also moves one of the higher ones too, which I think works out. The bottom ones for me are fight and labor, which I think works out that, my first instinct will not be to engage directly, but perhaps negotiate, or maybe just lean on other party members for that direct confrontation while I, take some other tactic. And then the bottom is labor, so I'm not going to be great at strong and moving around and being sort of peripatetic, but not like a pack mule sort of character. And I feel like that quality will help differentiate me from the other. Like, I still feel of an affinity with Wakiota in the sense of like we're intelligent and not bound by sort of like these earthly functionalities, but more of the human relational capacity and the intellect. Meaning that this is a very long-winded way to say that I think I'm above a lot of the menial physical labor that goes on with managing the party. I still see that my skills are useful in a way that maybe puts me beyond having to just carry stuff or labor things like that. I'll go drink water.
You're useful, so we won't call you out on it.
What's that, Tony?
Oh, I said he's useful, or she's useful, so we won't call her out on her not lifting heavy things.
The separation of duties is maybe a little not so even in the party, given my proclivity toward rather being focused on larger issues than doing the grunt work.
And Shezaran has, with that 5 relate, that secondary trait of like, anytime you have hirelings or followers, they basically steal your fame. right? So like when you're getting renown for stuff, you can have as many followers as you want. You can have a character that can be like Hercules and Aeolus or something, right? Or like, Xena and her Gabby. Like you can have other followers and things. They just take some of your renown because when they write stories about you, they mention this other person also.
You think it works for animals also?
Yes, yeah. When you have animal followers also, if you want to use something stats or keep something like on your character sheet, it's going to tax your renown. And so with you, this -1 here, that's a huge benefit. So you can have followers. We're really not probably going to get into too much in a one shot, but you can have followers that can, we can get you a retainer today, right? And you having that retainer means, they cost like half as much. They steal half as much renown as they do from other people. So you might have 3 or 4 of these other folks that count as like your character. It's like you, and then your 3 heavy lifters behind you, right? That stay sort of quiet. And like, it's totally fine if your character ends up kind of being 4 characters, right? Like 4 physical bodies is like your character because these followers that you have are just so, you're so charismatic that they just sort of stick to you and they can roll the labor when you need it sort of thing too.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm all for that. In terms of my physical appearance, I imagine sort of an unassuming but bright looking young woman. I don't since I imagine her being sort of a younger adult, I don't imagine her having had a direct role in the war, but maybe maybe some of the fallout from the war was this idea that her parents wanted to make sure that she was creating opportunities for herself, so that she wouldn't need to get caught up in sort of a lay person's life or sort of a peasant's life. That's kind of how I see that relationship playing out. And in terms of clothing, I think like a very brightly multicolored shawl that kind of covers most of her upper body with a pretty plain tunic underneath, and wears a hood.
That's exactly what all my Facebook ads show me every day. I don't know what it is, but a multicolored shawl with a plain tunic underneath and a hood. I think I get that ad like 4 times a day.
And as far as the arts and talents go, I think they all make sense. I like the roll for no shock when camping, ignoring penalties when marching. Animal. When it comes to retainers, is there a limit to the number of animal retainers?
No, it would be whatever you could afford renown-wise. So if you end up getting popular enough and you're doing big enough stuff and you've played to your, your alignments enough where you kind of have a renown to spare, you can have as many of those as you'd like. And the way a retainer works is you basically pick, for like a sort of a lower, cheaper retainer, you pick 1 footing, and it's basically like you can just roll in that, and it's like they're doing it instead of you. On higher levels, then they could have 4 stats, and you could sort of mix and match any footing among their 4 aptitudes. That might be like a 4 renown retainer. And so if you want to bring that person in for the session, they'll be with you in the story all the time. But if you want to bring them in mechanically for a session, you've got to pay that tax. And you could do it mid-combat if you wanted. You could be like, oh gosh, okay, fine, tax me, I need this roll. And they can come in and you can they're just stats to spare. The way the followers work in Early Dark, you have familiars, which are basically entirely separate characters. Like you can have a pet that has its full list, its full hit points and everything, you got familiar. You have retainers, which are basically stats that you borrow that you can roll with. So it's kind of like an extra set of arms, or like you've kind of like merged the 2 stat blocks together, right? Just use the highest from both. And then you have minions, which are just body shields. They just give you extra guard, extra wounds, but it's still all your stats. They're just, they'll roll up a little baby guard and they just become extra wounds on top of you. And so you can get those because, you're high relay, and we've even got spots here, when you meet folks, you can definitely pick up retainers or minions. Probably not a familiar now, just when it comes like sharing the second character sheet or something might be sort of tough. But
cool. Yeah, thank you. You mentioned renown. Where is that measured on the character sheet?
So on the bottom right-hand corner, on that front sheet, you can just keep track of how much renown you have, and you get that by role-playing your alignments.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. I didn't see that.
Yeah, and so it's just sort of like taxed. Like if you want to bring that follower in, you've got to pay. Usually, it's between like 1 and 8, maybe, sort of thing. And it just means you've got to role-play more. You're like, shoot, I need more renown. Yeah.
All right, cool. And then I didn't pick an epithet. I think, let's see, I was going through a couple here. I'm gonna go with the Soothsayer, not the Soothsayer, but the Soothsayer.
Whoa.
Yeah, I think what I mean by that is I had exhibited an extraordinary capacity for calming what either might have been a very dangerous or potentially debilitating situation within my family. You know, maybe I quelled a blood feud or something along those lines.
Yeah, that's great. Especially if you said, maybe you're too young to have been like a combatant in the war. If you were like this 11-year-old that brought two sides together before an important battle, right? Before the Alagoths rode out, you got Rohan to ride to Gondor or something, right? Like, yeah, I think that's
like cool. cured a family ill between like two brothers, right? And got them to pair up before riding off into war.
Like a key moment. That's cool. That's great. And everyone would know that. Like other Alagoths would have heard of, the daughter of Kertek. She was, that soothsayer that brought the brothers together. Brought Kertek back with his brother.
Yeah.
Sort of thing. Yeah. That's great. Do you have any questions about? I guess you said you didn't, right? So for skill blades, that's your fight move. So it's not super high combo there, but those little abilities can be important, right? If you ever end up using fight move, you can do these. You can strike with a 2-tack. No one else can do that. So if you have a pretty weak enemy, you can maybe get 3 or 4 strikes in one go. And that durable disrupt footing is pretty good. If you're fighting a monster that's really good in like fight labor, you can use a little 2-tack to say it can't use fight labor anymore, right? So that's a great way. So you can use that skill blades a little more technically. That grift, like you said, doesn't have to be manipulation. I almost picture like Axel Foley as a character who's like high guile, but not necessarily manipulative with it, right? That kind of like smooth talk where you're not being honest, you're being sort of showy, but you're still not being manipulative or evil or something. And then your clamber that ignore penalties when marching. It's actually not just marching, it's when moving or covering ground. So if you're going through like a difficult, like treacherous terrain or climbing or in like a thorn bush or something, those other folks I might give them like a -2 penalty on all rolls because of the terrain. You just ignore that. You ignore all terrain-based penalties for things like sharp ground, edgy ground, stuff like that, because your character's so like scrambly. Yeah, and then your animal stuff, I think you figured out pretty well.
Thank you.
So I think that's good. I think those are all of our characters. I think Tony, I need Theruvis needs an epithet, I think, or I didn't write it down.
Oh, right.
For like what she's called, that reputation she got from the war. And then I think, I don't know, we'll grab a drink of water and jump in.
Oh, the crimson coin.
That's
exactly what is what I did there. I did forget to say that. I apologize.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I see it on your name. Awesome.
No, that doesn't actually show up in the recording, so it's good that we say that.
Okay. Awesome. Well, yeah. Well, I'm going to fill up my glass of water, or maybe here I'll give an intro to the adventure first, and you can all sort of just stew and be excited.
Okay, that sounds good.
I guess, and I don't know where the cut would be, but maybe that's good. So I actually rolled up from scratch the way you would do it in the game. In Early Dark, the goal when you make your characters is you roll up sort of a situation. You zoom in from region to area to an actual like little moment scenario, and then you build your characters around that. And so you build characters that would realistically be involved in that. The one I rolled up was a crown. This is the Neferata Bronze Lake region. This is sort of a wealthier area down in the desert continent. They have this oasis that's this sort of like, not necessarily just like a luxury getaway, but it's a nicer, wealthier area on the continent. And this crown has noticed a disturbance, which I won't tell you what that is until we start up. But they have actually called you to their estate, and they have put together a group of folks from the right cast, right? Like sort of like upper middle, like the people, the movers and shakers they've brought together, and they want you to investigate a tomb of their ancestors and see if you can figure out what happened. So I just rolled that. Crown asks a group of rights to investigate a disturbance at a family tomb. And I kind of made all these characters then around that situation. We have our 2 druids, well, our druid and then our druid's caretaker, is the druid also noticed that disturbance and made it known to the local crown here, to the folks that are the sort of lore and religious leaders of the area. And the crown said, yeah, actually, that completely jibes with something that we've noticed as well. So you two are kind of, co-mingling in the mission, right? So Adhana is pretty much the leader of this Neferata crew. We'll say there's another 5 or 6 or 10 folks with you, right? You're going to have whatever sort of supplies you think you need, Adhana, to go on this quest. And then there's going to be these 2 Alagoths that are with you. And you will be leaving that Bronze Lake region, this very posh estate of like white marble and palm. And you will be going out into the dangerous foothills then of the Parushia Mountains and see if you can figure out what might have gone wrong with this tomb sort of buried into the foothills here. So that's our setup. And we'll start actually as you're getting called into the crown's chambers right in the beginning to get some more details. But that's going to be the setup. And yeah, I say we grab some water and hop back in.
Welcome to Deges and Dragons.